to the Burchfield Penny Center for the Arts this wonderful afternoon where the weather for a change gives us all a break to be here. The timing of Lukas Foss throughout his whole life was ironic. This concert was initially scheduled as a tribute to the music of Lukas Foss. And Lukas had an idea last week that it was time to take his dear part. And so we miss him dearly. So the concert has become a commemoration of the life of Lukas Foss as much as the music of Lukas Foss. And all of it put together with the heart and soul involved of Charlie Haupt and several of his other closest friends. Time is always of the essence. Indeed, the subtitle for this whole festival is called Time Cycle, which is a piece we're going to hear this afternoon. And so, by keeping in mind that time flies and we don't have much of it, I'm going to ask each of the members of the panel here to give a 1 or 2 minute capsule of one of their memories of Lukas along the way. And by the way, I should have introduced myself. I'm Ed Yudzinski from the Philharmonic, but I worked closely with Lukas as a chamber player as well for many years. Day one for Lukas Foss in Buffalo on the podium of the Philharmonic, by coincidence, was day one for me in the clarinet section of the BPO, so I was in a very good spot to see it all begin. I'd like to begin on my far left. We have Nils Vigelin, composer, Buffalo composer, and faculty at Manhattan School. Nils, would you share?
I'd like to remember Lukas as a teacher. I had the good fortune of studying with him in 1971 when he was a guest professor at Harvard. In those days, there were no private lessons. It was a seminar. So you might have everyone from a trembling freshman to a grad student on Social Security. There were oftentimes 15 to 20 people in the room. This was Lukas's element. The quality of his teaching was an immediate response to your work. And in all teaching situations, it's a trust situation. You have to trust what the person says to you, and you have to accept it. That's really how it works. And so what he would do is he would usually play through the work if you didn't volunteer to do it. And he would say, "This captivates my imagination. This is what I think is the core of your work." And I can still recall the first time he did this. He pointed to a small passage, and basically what he was saying is, given my experience, given what I know about music, this is where I think you are. And then it was your turn to go home and stew on this and figure out, well, why did he pick out those measures? But after you did that, you were then struck by, I think, the other thing that I will always remember about him is that this was an act of generosity. Because it's often the case in teaching that you're not quite sure if the teacher's there because they want to be there or because they're being paid to. And what Lukas communicated to you was that he actually liked what you had done. And this is the thing I will always remember about him, his generosity. When he gave you that comment, it came simply because he loved music and he found something there that he thought was special. God bless him.
Wonderful, Nils. Thank you, Nils. Charlie Haupt is I call him Charlie, forgive me, but Charles was our concertmaster for many years, and I had the wonderful good luck to work as a chamber player with Charlie many times over the years, and many programs with Lukas in Europe and here in the United States. Charlie.
I worked with Lukas for 15 years, both as a creative associate and as concertmaster of the BPO before he left, and of course for many conductors after that. And the aspect of Lukas that stands out most generously in my mind is the fact that he was the most extraordinarily flexible musician I think I have ever met. He was open to suggestions from everybody. He did not take position or class or notoriety into consideration when he considered other people's opinions. He took them at face value and coordinated with the kind of work that he was interested in doing, and in any way that these comments could improve his work, or somehow enlighten him towards other aspects of his own work, he would hearken unto that extraordinary gift. He was incredibly ingenious and had absolutely no respect for tradition whatsoever. I mean, how can you have respect for tradition if you bring a mandolin into the Messiah? To play the pastoral symphony, he played the pastoral symphony, he used a mandolin. That's a non sequitur. There's nothing to say after that. That sums up Lukas in a nutshell. There was nothing that stopped him from doing anything that he thought was interesting, new, creative, and ingenious, and most importantly, would add something that the composer himself would like, or would have enjoyed listening to.
Thank you, Charlie. Excellent. A wonderful memoir there. Jerry Kirkbride, on my left, a fine clarinetist. We had good fortune of playing chamber music, and also Jerry joined us on this section of the Buffalo Philharmonic. I think in even a couple of our early recordings, Jerry, if I remember.
Think so, yeah.
Remember, and he's at Arizona, the University of Arizona right now, professor of clarinet. Jerry, I know that Lukas meant a lot to you along the way.
Lukas was very much a part of my life for many, many years, and he entered my life probably earlier than anybody else on this panel, only because I was from Southern California, and when I was going to school across town at USC, he was a professor at UCLA, which really didn't mean anything especially, except that he had started his improvisational group already, and they made quite an impact on the music scene in Los Angeles at that time. And because that group included the clarinet, I, of course, was, even as a student, especially drawn to attend performances, and I eventually met the clarinetist Richard DeFallo, who probably many of you know because he spent a great deal of time in Buffalo as well. So when it came time, I was invited to be a creative associate in 1967, and to come up here and join this wonderful happening that was going on in Buffalo. And it was a wonderful and great honor. And to expand a little on what Charlie said about his openness to anything, there's a book by a fellow named Bruno Bartolozzi, who gathered together a book of extended techniques for woodwind players. And at the time it was very new, and it's how you play 3 or 4 notes at a time, and you do this and you do that, and you create all kinds of different unconventional sounds on your instrument. And I had occasion twice to go through that book with 2 different composers. One of them was Elliott Carter. I spent the afternoon with him once. This was after I'd been in Buffalo. And Elliott went through that book example by example by example. And he insisted on writing down, there was a fingering given for each example. And it was already well known that those fingerings work for some people and not others. And that you'll get a multiphonic sound, more than one sound at a time, but it may not be the ones that are notated. And so Elliott Carter wrote down, he took notes on every fingering in the clarinet section with me, and wrote down what actually came out of my instrument, which, wouldn't have necessarily been the same as if Ed had done it. With Lukas, he just went through that book and he said, well, okay, now, and we went, we spent some time together, we sort of went from the book, and now he says, take the barrel and put it on the bottom half of your clarinet, turn it upside down, play it out of your ear, do whatever you want. It was just, he was looking for anything that was new and adventurous and different, way beyond Bruno Bartolozzi's aims. And ultimately, as I said, I was here for 3 years in the late 60s with the Creative Associates, and I played in the Brooklyn Philharmonic when he was conductor for 6 years. And I've been a member of the Dorian Wind Quintet for longer than I care to admit. And we collaborated many, many times over the years, and we had some wonderful experiences, which some other time we'll talk about.
Thank you, Jimmy. Marvelous. To my right is our Buffalo's enfant chérie, Carol. Yes, Carol Vincent. And Carol, you were honored to work with Lukas, and especially to be to have dedicated to you his wonderful Renaissance concerto for flute and orchestra. And we've just, as we were speaking backstage, we've just uncovered an archival recording of that premiere, as well as a beautiful interview with Lukas. But perhaps you might give us a capsule of what it was like to work with Lukas as that concerto was coming out.
Well, thank you for calling me the enfant chéri, because he prided himself on calling himself the enfant terrible. And he was very, very open and demonstrative about that. Where to begin? My first snapshot of Lukas was in our home. I was barely an adolescent, and my parents, Peggy and Joseph Winsence, who many of you know, and they had him over for a New Year's Eve party, and he was here alone. And we have the most hysterical photos of him with those funny hats on and blowing those little things. And little did I know when I had that first glimpse of him that he would be the towering, extraordinary, charismatic figure that I grew up with when we went to the concerts. And I was sharing with Nils, I said, do you all remember when people got up in droves and left the hall? Do you remember that? It was very chic to just stand up and walk out. So please don't leave today. And I remember gripping my mother's hand and saying, Mom, what's happening? Is this what's happening to music? And she just sort of rolled her eyes and said, just sit still. So we had that incredible diet, and then of course I went to the Creative Associate concerts, and that's how I met the Dorian Woodham Quintet. But through the process of the Renaissance Concerto, I had a really treasured moment that I think I shared with Charles the other day. And I mean, he was so innovative. He said about the concerto, which he only finished like moments before the premiere. In fact, we were together at Christmas time for a party, and I couldn't resist. I came up, and this is Christmas before the May premiere, and I said, Lukas, what's happening? And he said, Renaissance. I think I'm going to do Renaissance music. I said, great. When am I going to get it? Oh, don't worry. Then in April, he came running in. I was playing with the Milwaukee Symphony. He said, I finished it. I finished the 5-voice fugue last night at 3 a.m. at the Pfister Hotel, where he was when he was with the Milwaukee Symphony. Oh, barely the ink was dry when we did the premiere. And he used to say, just be sure to tell everybody the right notes belong to Rameau, the wrong notes belong to me. So, we were in Birmingham, Alabama, and I was sort of a Rameau junkie at that time. I was listening to those wonderful recordings of the orchestra of the 18th century, of Rameau's Burchfield. Maybe you remember that. It's a miraculous recording. So we were sitting on the back veranda of a lovely hotel, and it was very warm. And those days we had Walkmans. I was listening to it, and I put the headphones on Lukas, and I said, you've got to hear this. Oh my God, you've got to hear this. He heard about a minute or two. He was very quiet, and he removed the headphones, and he looked at me, and he sort of looked upward. You know, he didn't often look at you in the eye, and he was always in his thoughts. He said, do you think people are going to be listening to my music 350 years from now, like we're listening to Rameau?
Yes, that's wonderful.
So, you know, he was wonderful. He was very much like a parental figure. I think he thought of me as a daughter. In fact, the inscription on the score says, to the great flutist from New York and the little girl from Buffalo.
Indeed, enfant chéri. We have, to Carol's right, is Charles Bornstein, a Buffalonian. Charles, I remember you as a very young teenager. Forgive me for the recollection.
I wasn't yet a teenager.
Even not a teenager. All right, okay, so forgive me for that. But Nevertheless, I know that you have some recollections with Lukas. Charles has gone on to become a marvelous pianist, a musicologist. We keep reading about his discovery of Mahler's notations and scores and things of this kind, and he's a brilliant pianist and conductor. Charles, you have a couple of points you might share with us, please.
Thank you very much. It's delightful to be here and see this interest that hasn't waned over the 40 or so years since it began in modern art in the city. I think the thing that most affected me about Lukas Foss was the fact that I was exposed to such cutting-edge modern music here that was going on nowhere else in America, or not at least in with the regularity that it was here, that often in the 20th century, composers that have gone so modern as Lukas did often call this a language, because the ways of playing, the extensive techniques, as they were talking about with the wind instruments, and that's also true with the brass instruments. And this, as new as it is, the first time you hear works where the instruments sound so distorted, it does become a kind of language. And to be immersed in this from the age of 12, not 13, left this kind of musical vocabulary. For instance, I'm sure Charles Haupt could tell you that he grows his fingernails especially long when they play a piece by Xenakis, because you have to pluck the highest notes with your fingernail, which sounds a little bit like a woodblock. And these kind of ideas of associating sounds from one group to another and creating works that deal with sonority-related ideas that is very present in the music of Xenakis was a big, it had a big effect on me, because I had heard it at such an early age, and it was shocking and brilliant at that time, but no one, from my experience of piano lessons and a few Beethoven and Brahms symphony concerts with Joseph Krips, who was indeed a masterful conductor and produced a beautiful balance and ease with the orchestra that is still evident on any recordings. It was such different with Lukas, because his intensity was almost infantile, even as a conductor. And he was criticized for this often, that it wasn't a real conducting technique, it was this grabbing of the sound or punching it. And these impulses are in all of the earlier music, the brutality or the primal qualities in Beethoven or even in Mozart that's so elegant. And it was this primal quality that Lukas really was able to pull out of classical music. And it was this quality that he translated in the modern music, or the modern music translated just through the way it was written. And I think to grow up with this and have that kind of background of sounds, as I'm sure some of you must have from the age of 12 onwards as well, was an indelible source of conducting modern music for myself, especially the Xenakis music, which people thought was so incredible. One of the performers today, Tom Kolar, was on three of our tours of Europe. And I think I could have never done this just as a routine or repertoire conductor and picking up, oh, there's a piece of Xenakis on the program today and learning it like that. It was this background, and Lukas really gave you a lot of background to the works that were being played. I remember him explaining when he had come from Poland how Penderecki used slow glissandi in the strings against very quick woodwind repeated notes against it. And it's one of the most simplest ideas, legato and staccato in music against each other, but it was never quite done in this way. So to have his insight from such an early age, I really don't think I could have had the insight that I do for the modern music and that modern impulse in the older music.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you very much for that. To Charles' right is our friend David Felder, who is the head of the composition department at UB. And David, I know that Lukas has meant a lot to you over the years, and I would be delighted if you could share one of those moments with us, please.
Thank you, Ed. It's very nice to be here among such distinguished colleagues and people who've been really great friends of mine and Lukas and contemporary music here in Buffalo for many, many years. My head's just filled with apocryphal tales, and you've heard a lot of reminiscences. Many of these apocryphal tales I won't share with you today, but I will speak about Lukas as a colleague. And I say colleague in a kind of strange way because it's marvelous to me that even though there's 30-some years difference between Lukas and I, he considered me to be his colleague. And this was astonishing to me when I was a young man. I'll tell you one apocryphal tale. I wrote my first orchestra piece when I was about 26 or 27. I had no prospects of having it played. I didn't know any conductors. And so I started talking to people to see if I could find somebody who would be interested. I thought maybe some conductor of a school orchestra or something like this. Somebody said, send it to Lukas Foss. I didn't know Lukas Foss. I put it in a little envelope, wrote a little letter, here's my first orchestra piece. I'd be really delighted if you would let me know what you think about it. Probably about 6 weeks later, to my great surprise, a letter came from Lukas Foss, handwritten. In this letter, he had read my score. There was no recording. This was, pardon me, folks, this was in the days when composers would read scores at the piano. They didn't need CDs to. So Lukas read my score, and he wrote back to me, and he did the kind of thing that Nils refers to. He found what was essential in the piece. He referred to it. He told me he loved it. He couldn't play it the next year, but would I be so good as to write a new piece for the Brooklyn Philharmonic for its first concert? And I thought, wow, this is really a great profession. I'm very happy to have chosen this profession. Ask me how many times it's happened since then. So that's the first apocryphal tale that I have to tell with Lukas, and indeed, I showed up at that particular rehearsal and so forth, and ran into Lukas. Obviously, he conducted my work, and it was marvelous, and I became friends with Lukas. Subsequent to that, there were many, many other occasions. I'll tell you one other occasion, because when you were dealing with Lukas, and when we are dealing with Lukas and his legacy, he is underappreciated as a composer. He is underappreciated as a kind of presence that had a kind of importance to the scene in the 1960s and 70s, particularly in American music. This was a place where we had warring camps that was going on. Lukas was a musician of no limitation. Imagine this. Most of us, I'll speak for myself, I don't want to speak for others on this panel, but most of us make a virtue out of our limitations. In other words, we find out, oh, I can't do that, I can't do that, I can't do that, I can do this, so that's where I'm going. And we find a way to make our own language and our own work. What do you do if you don't have those limitations? Well, what Lukas did was he embraced diversity way ahead of the way that we use that word now. And he didn't think about diversity in terms of the way people look or what socioeconomic class you come from or so forth. It was diversity of ideas. And he was able to penetrate to the core of those ideas, and that was reflected in his own work, it was reflected in his programming, it was reflected in everything he did. And he embraced, he did not imitate. And in the 1960s, when all of these warring camps were basically involved in mutually assured destruction, you had the Babbitt camp, and you had the Steve Wright camp, and you had other camps. Lukas did it all, and people had no idea what to make of this. And yet, that's where we are now. Where we are now is that we have a kind of freedom to pursue the various areas of the contemporary music world, and they are extremely wide-ranging. People like Jacob Druckmann said, without the Baroque variations, no windows from him, none of the work of Luciano Berio that was so important in the later 60s, and we might say none of the opening toward the music of the past that we've had. in Lucas's programming, he could do Xenakis and Steve Reich on the same program. This was unheard of. It was unheard of at the time, and people did not know what to make of it. Now, the second apocryphal tale having to do with his talent and abilities. In 1988, I was asked to program a music festival for the State University of New York, statewide. So all of the 64 campuses, imagine that, you're supposed to make a program to involve 64 campuses. So we tried to pick a variety of different things, and of course I had to pick a keynote lecturer, and that could only be Lukas Foss. So I asked Lukas to speak, and he was speaking to a wide variety of musicians, from young students to extraordinarily crusty musicology faculty members. So Lukas showed up a few minutes ahead of time, and I'd given him this charge, probably 2 months before. And he walked in, and he said, "Oh, David, hi, what am I doing?" And I said, "You're going to talk about, here's the title of the lecture that you gave me 2 months ago." He said, "Oh." And what he ended up talking about was the slow movement of the Beethoven Ninth Symphony. And he did it completely off the top of his head, and he talked about interpretation. He sat down at the piano, and he basically said, well, what did Beethoven mean? He played the opening 15 or 20 bars in Reduction about 10 different ways, each one entirely convincing. It was a brilliant tour de force. I've never seen anything like it to this day. That is Lukas Foss.
Vintage Lucas, yeah. To my far right is my dear friend, Jan Williams. Jan and I knew Lukas. We traveled together, played many chamber concerts, recorded Lukas echoey with Lukas at the keyboard, et cetera, et cetera. I could go on. Jan was honored by Lukas, as Carol was with her concerto. Lukas wrote a wonderful concerto for percussion dedicated to Jan Williams. Of all of us on stage, I dare say that Jan probably has more vignettes that he could share than the rest of us. But Jan, if we could have one or two, please, dear.
Yes, I promise to be short. I sat down this morning actually at home and thought maybe I should jot down a few things that I would like to mention. And I'm staring at this blank piece of paper, and honestly I didn't know where to begin. So I will say that Lukas brought me to Buffalo. I was 23 years old, and my wife Diane, she played in the Philharmonic, and I came with the first group of creative associates. Lukas took a real flyer on me because the other percussionist that he had hired, he had worked with very often, John Bergamo. And I'm sure that Lukas hired me because John said, he's good, take him, fine. My first real, I worked with him for all these years. We traveled together, we played echoey. I remember the first time I played his piece echoey early on, was filling in for someone. John couldn't play it. We played it down in Jamestown. And I sweat bullets. I think we had one rehearsal on the piece. It's a gigantic piece. But in any case, after that performance, I must have did a pretty good job, because from that point on, Lukas relied on me for a lot of his touring and playing. He was a wonderful, wonderful person, by all means, just the most caring, the most, he never forgot about you, he never forgot about us when he left Buffalo. He would call several times a year to check and see how we're doing. He was just the most, he was the most important person in my life in terms of my career. I could tell stories about Lukas and traveling. Certainly the most memorable events for me as a performer was playing with Ed and Lukas and a cellist by the name of Douglas Davis on tours in Europe, playing his piece Echoey and other pieces. A memorable story, Ed, Copenhagen, remember? We're driving from the hotel to the recording studio, the radio in Copenhagen, and he said, hey guys, we're short 10 minutes of music for this recording. And he said, but I have an idea, here's what we're going to do. But at the time we reached the recording studio, he had outlined this piece that put together. We put it together in about an hour. It was called non-improvisation. We worked about an hour. He said, okay, Ed, you're going to do this. Jan will do this. I'm going to play Bach on the piano. You're going to play huge clusters on the clouds of sound on the organ, and the Bach is going to peek its way through and submerge. Outlined it all. We worked on it. We recorded it. It's terrifically successful. We played it many times. We recorded commercially for recording companies. From that to his pieces like Echoey, which is so completely thoroughly composed, every detail, everything. I mean, he could absolutely do anything in music. It just oozed from every one of his pores. He was my champion, and I'll never forget him. And I must say that I'll miss him terribly. But I'm sure that you're going to enjoy hearing his music today. I think it's a wonderful group of colleagues who have come together to honor Lukas and his life. And thanks for all for coming. Ed, turn it back to you.
Pardon me. Yes, thank you, Jan. Wonderful recollections. And yes, I remember this piece called Non-Improvisation very well. Truth be known, when we finally came to record Non-Improvisation, also in that same recording, on that same recording is Echoey, one of the most difficult chamber pieces ever written. As Jan knows very well, and Doug Davis, cellist, played. I was the lucky guy to play clarinet on that recording. So you would think, with such a major piece, that this would be the primary purpose of that recording, and that would get most of the effort, right? Right. We actually, on that recording, was non-improvisation, and as Jan just described, there's a cloud of sound. No kidding. I think Lukas could not get that cloud in tune. If we worked on that, Jan, do you remember in that recording session, using electronic organ and all kinds of everything, slide clarinet I devised for him. You were playing the gong as well, and anything. He worked to tune this dissonant cosmos cloud for 4 hours. And we're waiting, by the way. Echoey is the big deal of the day, and we haven't even touched it yet. And then we recorded it for about an hour. So 5 hours into the session, we began to record Echoey at the time. But he cared so much about detail that no one else on the planet would have spent 4 hours tuning a cloud of sound than Lukas Foss. The point non-improvisation brings up a point. When Lukas, the Philharmonic, and I had celebrated the music of Lukas Foss about 7 or 8 years ago, and during which time the Buffalo Chamber Music Society sponsored the premiere of one of his quartets. Terrific event. And so I interviewed Lukas before the chamber concert, and one thing led to another, but something came up, one of his remarks, and I was prompted to ask a question I never heard addressed with Lukas, and I thought, I should ask it now, and it was very simple. I said, Lukas, you just mentioned improvisation and all that it takes and the creative challenges and everything. Is there a difference between improvisation and composition? Oh, yes, good question. Big difference, he said. He said, when we improvise, we're working with something we already know. When we compose, we're creating something that we don't know. Wonderful insight into I think it's a profound insight, but it gives you an idea of the extent of the true quest of the man in music. And using the word quest, I'm recalling that the first piece he ever performed in Buffalo was The Unanswered Question by Charles Ives, and the question still keeps coming up. And just with Lukas, as we all know here who knew him, just as you think you're about to get near the end of answering that question, he changes the question. And so there we have it. But thank you all. I think we're a little running out of time. So. We have a few minutes? Good. Good, excellent. Oh, yes, excuse me. Thank you, Jerry. We have here a member of the panel, cannot be with us today,
Oh,
is our dear Jesse Levine, who passed just a few weeks ago. And we have a recording of a brief interview he gave on Lukas and Lukas music. Thank you.
you will have noticed in the notes of the program that our intentions were to pursue Lukas's influences and the people who he influenced himself. One of his influences and one of his teachers was Hindenburg. And Jesse Levine, who was the principal violist of the Philharmonic for a number of years, you all know Jesse Levine. And subsequent to that, moved to Yale, taught at Yale, professor at Yale, viola. Had an illustrious career. Was laid low by father time, picked up cancer, and he passed on. And he was supposed to play the Hindenburg viola sonata for viola and piano, and he's not playing it, obviously, and it's not on the program, but he recorded, I believe, an interview.
Yes, that's right. We have a recorded
And
interview.
I think
Yes, thank you.
we're going to play it.
We're going to play it right now, I believe, Don, or if the audio engineer could cue it up, please. This is Jesse Levine speaking about Lukas Foss.
This is actually one of the kindest and sweetest people that I've ever known. Generous, beyond belief of himself and to music, and a wonderful engine for the creative process that Lukas was just burning with ideas always that would foster the voyage of new music in an atmosphere where people were reluctant to accept new music in the same way that they seem eager to go to a new film or see a new art show or go to a new play or things of that nature. People are much more willing to try out the new in other artistic disciplines, but if you mention new music or the avant-garde in the context of music, you will probably lose audience if you program it, in any way, carelessly. And Lukas somehow managed to, in spite of that, managed to present programs and create festivals and create opportunities for new music. He used his position as the director of the orchestra and the director of the Center for the Creative Performing Arts during those Buffalo years as a platform for advocating the finest in new music and giving new music a hearing. And so I honor him for that, because apart from the fact that he was one of the sweetest people I've ever known, he also was some rare flame that burned in him to present new music. And the wonderful thing about him was that when he did it, he almost never presented his own music. It was always in the service of other people's music. If he played 20 pieces of other people, he might sneak in one piece of his own. But he was, in a sense, selfless about it and took no advantage of the fact that he was a music director and entrepreneur in order to propagate his own music. He was always an advocate for everyone else's, and also that was noticed and honored by everyone who worked with him. Well, Lukas just opened up doors for us that were it not for him, we wouldn't have experienced these extraordinary events.
All right, thank you. That's wonderful. Yes, please try it.
To lighten the moment a bit, one important aspect of Lukas that hasn't been brought up is his driving skills. We went on a tour to McGill University in Montreal. It was late winter, early spring, we were all stuffed into this car, and somehow the face decided that Lukas was going to be driving. And we entered the campus, and we knew the building. We could see the music building where we were going to. And no matter how we negotiated the roads, it was like being, in a forest. We ended up in the exact same place. Now, the music building was maybe 300 yards away. It was quite a distance. We were separated from the music building by this soggy lawn, by a very pristine lawn, but soft and mushy. Well, Lukas said, "This is ridiculous. I can't do this over and over again." He just veered off the road, went onto the lawn, went directly, which is how he did everything in life. He went directly to the music department, and I was the only one to look behind. And I look behind and I see these 12-inch tracks leading right across this beautiful soggy lawn to the music department. And I wanted to almost sign Lukas's name to that, because it was a different kind of art. I mean, again, Lukas manifested his genius graphically this time. And this was a little insight into one of his rare skills. Wonderful driver.
We were playing, Charlie, I know you were on the program, I don't remember, I think maybe it was Paradigm with Jan was conducting, and we were playing Paradigm at the All Right Knox Gallery up in the court there, just right across the street. Some years ago, and this by now Lukas had given up driving. Actually, driving gave up Lukas. He was in driving school so many times that really happened. They finally said, "We don't think this is a good idea for you." No kidding. And so Lukas needed to be driven around, and we're already now in the mid-70s, I would say. It's about the timing of it. And so I was going to drive him back to the Lenox Hotel, to where he was staying that particular week. And but Lukas said to me, he said, "Ed, do you mind if we take Seymour Knox home?" And I said, "Why, sure, that'd be fine. I'll drop him off as well. Doesn't live far, no problem." Well, Lukas, this was after the concert, during the reception. He introduced me to Seymour Knox, and Lukas disappeared. And the place was thinning out quite a bit. Now finally, there were just a few people left. Seymour Knox was looking a little nervous and a little worried. He said, "Gee," I just had some folks trying to find Lukas. He said, you don't think he's left yet?" I said, "Oh no." I said, I can find him. So I knew exactly where he was, and Jan would know, Charlie would know, any of who worked with Lukas. He was on the phone. He was in the phone booth at the All Right Knox Gallery, because Lukas could never go 10 minutes without making a phone call someplace. He used to drive us nuts with that, as a matter of fact. He'd want us to choose a route so there are the maximum phone booths along the way. I'm not making it up. Actually did.
Charles Warner once commented the guy must have a string attached to his dime.
Yeah, it's remarkable. So I found Lukas, and I ran back upstairs to the court, and I said, "Seymour, he'll be right off the phone. He's coming." He said, "Yeah." He said, "Well," he said, you managed to find him." He said, "You're in the Philharmonic, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Tell me, I've read in the paper that there have been some complaints about his programming and this and controversial, but how do the players feel about his basic musicianship, actually, though?" Seymour Knox was quite asking a very, very serious question. So, "Mr. Knox," I said, "yes, he's controversial, and Lukas is always, everything's spinning around about him, but all the players on stage, even the ones who complain, they complain because they wish he would devote his life to Debussy and to Brahms and to Beethoven instead of doing all this experimental work, because he has such a profound gift." And Knox said to me, he said, "Oh, I'm so pleased to hear that." He said, "Because Lukas Foss is the only genius I ever met." Wonderful remark from a man who met a few along the way. We're about 10 minutes before the hour. Are we all right?
Yeah, maybe we should.
Which one? Yes.
I remember a story Lukas told me before he died about his driving. It's funny. he was appointed by the United States government to take Shostakovich around during the composers conference between the USSR and America. I think it took place at Madison Square Garden. And Lukas took Shostakovich back to his apartment and played a piece of his, which Shostakovich didn't like. And Lukas then drove him back to Madison Square Garden. And when they arrived there, Lukas said, "Well, we're here." And Shostakovich looked at it and said, "Well, I like your music better than your driving."
Perfect. Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I think we could wind it up here, but thank you all for coming this afternoon. You've been a marvelous attentive group. You probably could tell that if we could all start to collect these vignettes, it could go for, not for hours, but for days without repeating the story. The lightweight anecdotes are abundant. They're all over the map, but he was at the same time a very serious musician about everything he did. And so we pay homage to Lukas today. Thank you all. Thanks.